and that the power of having coverage is, it's really, you can't buy advertising that comes anywhere close to the credibility and social proof that you get from having third-party sources that are respected for you, in their publications and in their, the content that they're putting out there. So yeah, my background is as a journalist, and I wrote about the fashion industry and e-commerce and startups and primarily like focused on the intersection of fashion and tech for many years. I was in San Francisco for about 16 years, and I now live in Virginia, which is where I grew up. So I made one of those midlife young kids cross-country moves. But I was out in the Bay Area for a long time, which put me in the center of a lot of startups that today are bordering on household names. And a lot of them had ties to sustainability and innovation in fashion. So, Stitch Fix, The Real, Poshmark, all of these places that have become kind of like, I almost think it's like an oh duh, of course we shop this way, but 10 years ago that was not the case at all. So we're really in the midst of this interesting revolution, and I got very, very interested in covering that space and did that for a number of years, and then went on to create my own podcast where I interviewed female founders of innovative fashion companies that have ties to sustainability and ethical practices. And it's called The Spirit of 608. And I've been doing that for the last 5 years or so. Sharman has been on the show a couple of times, and I've loved interviewing her, and I love having people that have really interesting perspectives on what's happening in fashion and how we can make it more ethical and sustainable. Interestingly, I have done that for quite some time, and it led me to work with a lot of ethical, sustainable fashion designers and brands. I've primarily focused on helping them with visibility, and I have a DIY PR course that I offer to designers and small business owners, and a number of different products that help people with visibility and reaching the media. So I do a lot of training around that for people. Going forward, I have been in the middle of a bit of a shift and a pivot lately because what's happening in sustainability and ethical fashion has changed so much. And I am somebody that loves to be working with, what I see is like the future thing that isn't quite mainstream yet. And I've really been drawn into the direction of working with women and their financial futures, and getting really involved in how cryptocurrency and blockchain technology is related to financial independence and empowerment for women and traditionally marginalized communities, and also how it's related to sustainable development in different countries, especially. So I'm really thinking a lot about that, and I wouldn't be surprised if the podcast starts to veer in that direction going forward. But my background and work for many years has been taking the experience I had in the media and being on the journalism side, and using that to train and consult and help with businesses that I see making an impact that I would love for more people to know about, help them figure out how to do it in a way that actually makes sense for their business, because they're not going to go out and hire a PR agency and pay $4,000 a month on a retainer basis. I wanted to bring another solution. So that's where I come from and how I got into this whole conversation, and a little bit about where I may be headed in the months to come.
Until the pandemic happened and I decided that I didn't want to deal with the challenges of running a business in New York City, just because of the overhead, and the consignment business has changed in the past 5 years in terms of a lot of people working online with dealers and receiving higher and higher percentages. And I just really needed to pivot my business into something that was more profitable and sustainable. to pay my bills and make a living. So what I did before the pandemic was I pivoted into home goods, and I did a lot of resale on home goods. So I had people donating things. And I just felt like it was time to rebrand my business into something that I wanted to do for myself that was more in line with what I was doing in my career throughout my experience. And so that was becoming more about sustainability, and not that it's less about fashion, because fashion is an industry that really is doing their part to kind of change how they do production, and taking the responsibility for the amount of waste that it produces, and kind of allowing the consumers to understand kind of their darker side of production, and saying that they want to make changes. So while that was going along with my business plan and my branding, I wanted to branch out and do even more than just the fashion, because as much as I love fashion, it's not my everything. So I ended up looking and researching places to live and opening a business, and I decided San Antonio was going to be a good place to do that, just based on the amount of small businesses that thrive here, the lower overhead cost of doing business, and all of that good stuff that I think I really need to have to support it. So while I'm rebranding and I'm in the middle of looking for a space right now, I'm actually negotiating a lease for downtown San Antonio, in an area that's kind of building up. So there's not really a lot in the area that I'm looking at. It's a part of Broadway, which is the northeast side of downtown. There are a lot of residential buildings, and I'm excited to offer my home goods. I'm doing a lot of like upcycling stuff. My business plan incorporates a lot of classes and community organization, which is part of my rebranding. So I really want to use all the challenges I learned from owning a business in New York City, and just kind of like, implementing all of those challenges, which are just less and less brick and mortar, and opening up my space to other vendors and community organizations like charity drives and things of that nature. So when I found Ethical Network in San Antonio, I was really excited, because I also want to do wellness programs after hours, and things like that, because my clients have needs, and these were the things that they needed. They needed advice and classes that relieve stress, and understanding parenting, and whatever their needs may be, and it became a resource for people. And I just want to kind of be that meeting source for everyone to kind of come in and enjoy the space.
I love that. It's great to get the background, and it's interesting as you're talking, there's so many themes in there that tie into your personal story that, would be great jumping off points for reaching out to media and participating in articles in the future. So I hope that you're like keeping track of some of the threads of your personal story, because a lot of times, things like what you've gone through in the past, year and a half or 2 years over the pandemic, they're major cultural trends, and there's a lot of publications that are covering those things, and they want to talk to real people who have a perspective. And I've seen a lot of journalists looking for people like you to talk to. So I just want to put that out there, because I think a lot of times when I talk to people, they'll, sort of not even realize that they have a lot of information and expertise and, valuable things to put out there into the mainstream media that can then help bring new audiences to them, especially when you're in a new part of the country, in a new location. So. All right, now I can't, let's see. Oh, you're
okay. Sorry. I also think I don't want to take too much time here. I just thought it was super interesting that you did this like exhaustive analysis of the entire scene after identifying sustainability and your interest in the pivot and taking what you have and what you're interested in and finding the best location to do it. And I hope we can talk offline more about how it is you identified San Antonio as like the place, because you're coming from one of the most trendy, the most, fashion centered, Brooklyn of all the places in New York, right? And you chose San Antonio. I think that's kind of a powerful statement about, about overhead issues with business and I think in a lot of ways, I know this is about elevating you and your brand, but I think this could be about creating, more of an interest in our locality, right? As a place that sustainable and purpose-driven businesses can grow. Just, that this is a great incubator for that kind of space.
Absolutely. 100%.
Anybody else want to weigh in and tell me about your business?
Wish I had one. I'm on the board. I'm a scientist. I'm actually looking to start a consulting operation based around career development of a particular type of scientists, like faculty, faculty at major universities are doing research, grant writing, that kind of thing. So really far from fashion, not nearly as interesting and creative and fun, but it'll pay the bills hopefully at some day.
Well, that's extremely important. And, believe it or not, the issue of creating a business that's sustainable, and I'm not in the environmental sense, is really a big problem that I see, especially for lots of small businesses that are started by people who care about, mission and issues and have really gone towards the business for those reasons. I think there can be a lot of things that come up around, should this be profitable and how profitable, and am I allowed to do that? And what does that say about me? And, how much I care about these issues. And so, I think it's really important to always have that be part of the conversation, because otherwise it's a hobby and it holds people back. So
yeah,
I'm big on that. And working with sustainable and ethical fashion designers has really made me focus on that more in recent years, because I see a lot of people struggling to build businesses that are able to support them in the way that they need and deserve to be supported.
So I'm wondering specifically in fashion and in design and in the spaces that you guys inhabit. I mean, I know from speaking to Charmaine some of the challenges that she faced, but I'm just wondering what you've seen in your clientele, and of course, Alexandra, what you're sort of facing is the kind of immediate front end challenges when you're trying to establish in a space. Like, you've already identified space, you said, but what's the sort of next, what are the big things that sort of are priorities in the very beginning, as you've seen them, laid out, and what's the sort of best way to think about things for people who maybe aren't as mature in their business operation sense and who haven't run businesses before?
Well, I'll say, and I'm sure, Alexandra, that you have tons of insight into this, having been, building your own retail, brand. But to answer your question, and the people that I have worked with, like I was saying, everybody's different, but I have seen a lot of people come into, especially ethical and sustainable entrepreneurship, with a desire to do something important and make an impact, and that they're led by that more than they are making sure that the business is going to make enough money to pay for the things they need to operate, but also be able to eventually bring on people to help them so they can grow, so they can pay their taxes, so that they can have health insurance. And there's all these costs in entrepreneurial life that I think, it can make it much more expensive than it sounds from the outset when you're looking online and everybody's telling you how easy it is to start a business. And there's, all these programs. And yes, it's true. Anybody can start a business, and entrepreneurship is at the core of, I think, just it's not like some new thing that people can be entrepreneurs. I think a lot of times entrepreneurship is presented like this trendy thing, but at the same time, I think that there's a lot of people that get into it, and in sustainable and ethical fashion. One of the things that you run into is that you get a lot of blowback from people if you're pricing things at a certain level.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've seen this happen to all kinds of entrepreneurs online where, you know, take an example of like yoga pants, and you're selling this product and it's $80 or $90, and people are like, well, how elitist are you? You know, sustainable, ethical fashion and home goods and products are, you know, out of reach for most people to have as a staple in their wardrobe. But then when you look at the actual cost of running the business, it's this very tricky thing to get it right. And so that's where I've seen a lot of people in the fashion space in particular run into issues.
Yeah, I would say definitely telling the story, because it's doing any kind of sustainable business or fashion. And I've worked in, prior to this, as a business owner, I worked in a fashion line that was in New York City that was an ethical fashion house, essentially. It's a lingerie company that was, they sourced everything ethically, the materials. And one of my major issues is I was a store manager for them for years, and then I worked in production, was just not being able to tell the story, to communicate the education and educate the consumer, basically. They didn't really do that very well, but everybody behind the scenes is running around spending, you know, hours and hours during the week doing all these things that requires to be ethical. You know, you have to see your production and oversee it and make sure they're doing what they're saying they're doing and paying people what they're saying they're paying people. And it's tremendous amount of work. So I think one of the challenges for me, even with the work that I do, is just how do I tell that story? How do I educate my consumers in a way that they don't feel that they're being, you know, told what to do, or this is the better way of living, and, you know, you don't want to have that tone about it, but you do need to explain it. You know, that's, I think, one of the major challenges for me in my business, and what I've seen other people go through, like price point, like what you're saying. There's a whole story behind the price point.
Yeah, and you're pointing out something that's super just accurate. I mean, the fact that like you can't really like market to people with this depressing negative like story, you know, and if all of your communication outwardly is about, you know, this is how difficult it is to do the business like this, or this is how time consuming it is, and or, you know, these are the issues with the environment, or these are the issues with labor standards and human trafficking, like all those are really important issues. But you know, the reality is that most people don't purchase based on those things. And so even though all of us in this space who want those things to be elevated really believe in them and believe in the value of other people learning about them, when you're marketing, you have to sometimes come up with other ways to talk about the brand that gets consumers excited, because ultimately them buying is, you know, it's the most important thing to the sustainability of the business, you know, and then that allows you to make the impact that you want to make. But I think it can be really tricky for entrepreneurs because, you know, like you said, storytelling can be complicated, and also you have so many other things that you're trying to juggle when you're trying to align the business with certain values. And people often don't, you know, it's not, you know, I don't like to blame consumers for these issues, because I think people are busy, and I think people ultimately want to buy what they need and they want to move on, and, you know, it's their choice. So I don't believe in putting the burden on the consumer, but I do think that makes it, you know, it makes it more difficult of an endeavor for the owner of the business.
I'm also wondering how much of the time that entrepreneurs spend thinking about this stuff, how much of it is sort of built along the lines of thinking about how how to scale this and how to get that price point down. Because I mean, it really is, it's sort of true. And when I think about this, and when Sharman and I talk about this in terms of the ethical network, the storytelling part is easy in some respects, because you guys are all such incredible people with incredible stories. What's more, especially from a grant writing perspective and trying to like fund this and find practical ways to sort of build connections between businesses and to sort of imagine a supply chain sort of coming up and things that could potentially kind of be models for how this could scale and more industries could become sustainable. And it suddenly becomes less of a burden for the people who are sort of living on the borders of being able to, like, you know, because a lot of people have to make decisions. You know, if I have this income, how can I make the best choices for survival for my family, but also still, you know, make ethical choices for, you know, sort of the longevity of whatever, you know, aspect of sustainability that I'm interested in. And I feel like when people say sustainable fashion, there's almost like this inevitability, like it's always going to be at that price point. It's always going to be this sort of like unattainable thing that then becomes the signaling thing that then becomes its own sort of, you know, elitism, right, almost. But the point is, like the smallest industries, the most, you know, rural areas are the most sustainable, right? Like it's easy to be sustainable, right? If you know, sort of think about it the right way. But in some ways I worry that like it almost gets co-opted, right, by certain industries into becoming this price point enhancer, right? I don't know, there's a lot in there and it kind of wandered, but how much of your time is spent thinking about like, how do we build the infrastructure that's needed to bring those price points down? Or is that even part of the conversation yet?
I mean, I think, you know, I was thinking about this today as I was reading the couple like most recent issues of Women's Wear Daily, and I was just skimming, like I skimmed through them for clients to try to put things in front of them that they really need to read. And I was noticing how many stories have something to do with sustainability, and how many major brands are tying themselves to that mission and that subject in the news. But what's interesting is that they're all kind of using that word, but they have different initiatives. So I think there's this huge wide range of things that could fall into that umbrella. I mean, a lot of people are talking about, you know, becoming a B Corp as being the most direct avenue towards sustainability right now. You've got major brands doing things with their like water consumption. You've got others that have different standards around factories, and you know, there's the whole movement around dead stock. I mean, there's all these different ways that you could get in there. And I guess my perspective is like, it's all good. I you know, 5 years ago, this was not the case, and it's almost overwhelming now how much news there is about sustainability. I think ultimately, for better or for worse, the bigger the brands are, the more influence and power they have to create systemic change at the manufacturing level. But I do think that, you know, all of the smaller businesses and brands, they lead to increased opportunity for, I think, change on a local level. And a lot of analysts and you know, sort of people that predict what's going to happen in the future in terms of retail trends say that localization, I mean, it's going to continue getting more and more important. People, especially when you look at Gen Z, younger consumers, what they care about is personalized, localized, you know, merchandise. And so I think that small business owners, independent designers, whether you're talking about fashion or something for the home, you know, or even, you know, your food, they are bringing that kind of localized option to a body of consumers that I think are going to care about it immensely in the future. And also they're opening up a lot of doors for entrepreneurship. And I don't think we're there yet in terms of, you know, entrepreneurship is still really risky. Our country is, it makes it really hard for people who don't have a full-time like W-2 job to be an entrepreneur. I mean, my like hassle with health insurance and, you know, with childcare. I know entrepreneurs in San Francisco, one of whom last year, 2 years ago, she had to crowdfund her own maternity leave. I mean, there's all kinds of issues like that that I think play into us not being where we need to be with entrepreneurship. But I do think that having on the localized level, the changes with the ability for people to run their own businesses are really, really important, almost as important as the systemic like manufacturing changes, because I think they empower people to be able to have the potential to live their lives a certain way, which I find is really important, especially for women. Because I just don't think the way that jobs and corporate America functions is like really in alignment with how a lot of women want to live their lives over the course of, you know, a 25, 30-year career period of time. So I don't know. I think there's a lot there, but I do think that we're like net positive direction. We still have a long way to go.
And I'm kind of with you, Lorraine, just talking about the systemic thing, because I think it's just a deeper seated issue, because especially thinking about scaling, because after a while you get so big that you no matter what you do, you can no longer be considered sustainable. That's just the way. If you're just producing that much, and especially at the amount that is required in some of like the overseas factories, that's not sustainable any way you throw it. It's just not. So so it is just a systemic issue in the way we allow entrepreneurship and the way our, you know, corporate setup here, especially in America, it's just it's not meant to be sustainable. It has, you know, it's meant to make money, and that's the bottom line, and that's the goal. And anything outside of that is not really looked at. And I think too, we have to look at like salaries and pay and just wages in general, because a big part of the reason that people cannot afford the prices is because of their wages and because of their salaries and the way we treat workers, you know, along that the bottom end of the supply chain, and, you know, in corporate America. And if everybody were paid what they should be paid, and, you know, wealth was distributed in the manner that it should be, this wouldn't be as much of an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I know that our conversation is like ostensibly about PR marketing, but I also find that the financial aspects of all of this to be one of the most fascinating things to think about in this day and age, because I do think we're in the middle of something of a revolution in how people think about work and how people think about money and finances. And I think it's going to take a lot of growing pains, because I see a lot of women and entrepreneurs out there who are really reevaluating their relationship with money, and corporate America has sort of made us all believe that it's bad to be profitable if you care about mission-driven, you know, social justice, you know, like working and standards and labor standards and human rights, that somehow profitability and those things are at odds. And they are in corporate America, but then there's a lot of examples of entrepreneurs, and, you know, female entrepreneurs in particular, who are building businesses that, you know, by virtue of their profitability are actually able to push social justice and, you know, I think more impactful ideas forward. And so we're in this like interesting time where I think you're going to see more and more examples of those types of people, you know, hopefully setting a different path forward so that we will see more opportunities to actually make a lot of money, but also do a lot of good in the world. So I'm optimistic about that. Yeah.
Hi, Carla. I just wanted to say that. Sorry.
Totally well taken. But I think one of the lowest hanging fruit here is this idea of just reducing waste. And there's a couple of different ways to reduce waste. And you know, Alexander, you mentioned upcycling. And I think that is such an important, you know, whether it's, you know, at the level of chemical reusing, you know, making textiles out of water bottles, or if it's just taking really lovely vintage things and giving them a new life or purpose. That to me just seems like such a beautiful and elegant no-brainer in this type of, building the most local and sustainable type of business, right?
Exactly. To me, that's where you can change the cost of materials. You can't change the cost in labor, right? Because you're working to increase pay. And so I actually worked with Eileen Fisher, which people know as a major brand, and what they're actually working on right now is giving an incentive for clients to bring back their clothing that's been used that they no longer want, whether it has small stain or hole in it. And they have a whole facility. They're based out of New York, and they had a whole facility in upstate New York where they would bring in all of these clothes. I mean, they had a huge warehouse full. And they actually didn't know what to do at this point, but they started buying machines that were breaking fibers down and creating a new material with the fibers. And they're working on that right now, but they have no connection. There's no networks. There's no companies working together with each other to learn how to tackle these issues. That they have all this material that's recycled and they don't know what to do with it. They have small companies that are coming to them. They're interested in buying material, but nothing in a way that's going to be for them, feasible as to continue the process. Another thing that they were doing is, and when I say a small incentive, like they literally gave people maybe $5 off of their total, sale if they want to make a purchase, and that's it. And they're bringing back these Eileen Fisher pieces that cost, close to $200 a piece, used, of course, but they were also reselling them. So people could come in to their Soho store, and there's a rack of resale. And this is something that in New York City, years past, everybody did. Everyone had a vintage rack in their boutique. Everyone had a resale rack. And you can get a perfectly good, Eileen Fisher piece for $50 or $40, which is in line with a resale price point. And I really think that incorporating these ideas of what we've done in the past, that's basically the name of my business is Maxis Modern, because I want people to understand that sustainability and resale is a modern concept. It's something that we have to go back in order to go forward with. And that's what I did in my business. I mean, in order to fix my profit margin, I basically would thrift on my days off and find the home goods, but I only shopped when they were 50% off. And I was a buyer for many years, so I know production and I know what to look for. So I'm finding, amazing stuff that just takes an eye to understand what it is, and cleaning it up, disinfecting it, whether I'm upcycling it or not. That's really, for me, like the only thing that I could do to change my profit margin and make it more profitable.
It's interesting that you mentioned the resale because, I think that, we're in this moment where a lot of major brands are going to be rolling out their own, and will be in increasing numbers rolling out their own resale. And, there are several platforms that allow companies to white label secondhand commerce options for their websites. And that's been a major barrier to a lot of it for years, because having a one-of-a-kind product that you're selling is a totally different endeavor than having something with a lot of SKUs to it on an e-commerce site. So I think technology is also playing into this. I mean, in e-commerce, there's also science behind textile recycling in different ways you can remake or make new thread out of old garments and things like that. So I think the tech piece is really important too. So there's just a lot of different factors in all of this and pushing it forward.
Carla, though, I would love for you to talk about what you do and how that can be marketed.
So I run a co-working space, and part of that is the sharing of resources and space particularly lowers a lot of utilities. It is a lot cheaper to call one building with multiple offices than multiple individual offices. We often have once you start consolidating, we have one printer between 6 businesses instead of 6 printers for 6 businesses that only print occasionally. So consolidating resources among small businesses means you get to take advantage of economies of scale. It means that printer gets to get used more instead of having big chunks of plastic all over the place. It means it's one fridge instead of 6 that at the end of its lifespan is going to go into a landfill. So a lot of that is where co-working is sustainable. It's sharing resources so it's used to its full efficiency instead of everyone having their own thing. That's usually what we talk about when we talk about sustainability. And then we also talk about also being sustainable in business, like charging enough so you don't go out of business and we all have to be sad.
I think that's really interesting. I've worked in many co-working spaces over the years, and I don't think I've heard any that I personally was working in lean into that part of their story about how, the resource sharing could benefit businesses both from an environmental standpoint, but also from, I think they'd be more likely to lean into the, the financial upside of it for different companies with resource sharing. But I don't know. I would encourage you to, if you're out thinking about reaching out to media in the future, to just know that that's an interesting angle that you could bring into conversations with press, because I think you're going to see more and more and more coverage about how work is changing, and you have a really interesting vantage point on that.
That's the sustainable part. If you're talking ecological, our garden is 100% native plants, drought resistant, and does not need to be watered. It is also a food forest, so if anyone wants to go foraging, please come to the plants.
And do you ever pitch things like that out to any of your regional press?
We do. We will about once every 6 months host an event where the lady who designed our garden will come talk about the importance of native species and being sustainable in your water usage, and how native plants are naturally more drought resistant. She will also talk about native edible plants and how eating local ends up being more sustainable in the long run. We do talk about sustainability. Most people want to hear the financials.
Of course. Yeah, and I'm thinking that your audience for people that come into the space and want to pay you to work there are going to care about that side of it, primarily. But when you think about from a marketing standpoint and getting press coverage that you don't have to pay for, that's earned media, I think that the story on the sustainability side, where having a food source in a co-working space, that's really interesting. And I think lots of people would want to read about that. And they may not be your ideal customer, but maybe their brother, sister, mother.
Any press is good press.
What'd you say?
That's not a lie. Any good press is good press.
Yeah. And I like to continue to sort of encourage people to think about reaching out to the media as a regular part of their business operations, because I think that oftentimes business owners are quick to put a lot of time into social media, which is important, but completely bypass all of the opportunities there are to get into magazines and websites and to get featured on podcasts and, all the various forms of media that there are out there today. There's just so much opportunity. And when you have a really interesting story like that with a human angle and a business angle, it's just, I would want you to keep it front of mind that if you have an event like that, hey, maybe reach out to a local news organization and tell them that it's happening, so that they could come and feature you.
And I need to do that more often. We used to partner with a lot of the local newspapers, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, still working on getting everything back on track and figure out who's still at their old job. So yeah, I need to be more active about reaching out to people.
Yeah, well, and
Or
it's hard. I
making
mean,
new connections.
resurfacing after, well, and it's not even post-pandemic yet exactly, but I think that there are so many ways to increase your reach and visibility and have other people tell your story, and then to put your story in other people's publications. That I like to sort of beat the drum of keep thinking about that, because I notice time and time again that it's something that people will put to the side. I think most of the times it's a time issue, and also reaching out to the media can be somewhat like daunting in that you're frequently not going to get a response, and it feels weird, but at the same time, the people that do it consistently and don't have too much of their ego caught up in it will end up getting these visibility opportunities that other businesses won't.
I'm 100% on with you with it feels weird.
Yeah.
That's pretty much cold calling.
Yeah, and cold pitching is I often find that when I'm working with entrepreneurs who want to get visible through PR, either because they've kind of done what they feel they can do on social and they need another avenue, or because they don't like social media as a primary place. They don't want to be on Instagram all day. It's just not comfortable for them, or they're, they want a different method and strategy. A lot of times what the blocks and the challenges are, the big hurdles come down to either lack of knowledge, just not understanding how the media works, because the media don't make it easy to understand how they work. They purposefully obscure a lot of information. And so there's like a knowledge gap, but if it's not the knowledge gap, it's a time issue, because entrepreneurship is so full of different moving parts and you have so much on your plate, and just carving out that time to do something that might happen or might not can be difficult. So I often encourage adding some structure around it to make that possible. But then the third thing is typically it's like a mindset issue, or a feelings issue around the experience of trying to put yourself out to the media. And then sometimes the experience actually interacting with the media, people can frequently feel things will come up for people when they're being interviewed, and then when they see themselves talked about, and it can be a very difficult process for some people. But I do think there's a way to make it work, and that the power of having coverage is it's really, you can't buy advertising that comes anywhere close to the credibility and social proof that you get from having third-party sources that are respected through you in their publications and in their the content that they're putting out there.
I was like, how often would you recommend like putting out these?
Like reaching out?
Yeah, reaching.
Well, it's going to depend on your business. I think one of the interesting things, that especially in the sustainable, ethical fashion, or if you have a product-based business, and also this applies to like a co-working business as well. You're not constantly putting new things out there. You have a small collection, or you have a co-working space, like what you're selling is kind of what you're selling, and so it used to be that people would promote every new product drop, and things don't really work that way anymore, like every new season's collection, for example. And now I think that a lot of entrepreneurs are looking at different ways to come up with what I call media moments, but a news driver or a reason to reach out to the press. I think a great like rule of thumb, or place to start, is thinking about having one piece of news or media moment that you're going to reach out to the media about each quarter. And if you're a bigger company and you have a lot of news that needs to be public, or you have a lot of different audiences you're trying to reach, sure, you might be doing constant PR outreach. But if you're a small business and you're trying to balance this with the other activities, I think once a quarter is great. And I think a lot of times you're going to be better served by thinking of yourself as somebody with like a thought expertise, or unique point of view into bigger cultural trends. So, just in this conversation, brought up like San Antonio as an emerging destination for entrepreneurs. Shifting your business to increase your profit margins, going from consignment to, upcycling and home goods, and like all of these things. You're talking about co-working and bringing in, possibly having, events around this, food production post-pandemic. You can actually have people in your space again. Like all of these things have ties to like bigger, more universally like interesting subjects, and there's a lot of journalists that are writing about them. So you want to do things that make you easily found, is how I like to think about it, because it's great to do outreach, but the best stories come from media and content creators thinking they discovered you and finding you and coming to you and wanting to feature you. So there's a lot of things that even if you don't want to do a formal media campaign where you write a pitch and you have a media list and you're going out and sending your emails, and hoping that people at the publication are interested and will agree to do a story on you, there's a lot of other things that you can prioritize in your business that make a difference for PR, yes, but they also make a difference in a lot of other ways, and increase your discoverability. So for example, things that improve your SEO, and things that can help with that oftentimes are connected to content production and creation. So maybe you decide that you're somebody that loves to create content. You don't mind guest writing for other people's websites, or creating a guide to something, or putting something out there that you can then cross-publish on other websites, and in hopes of being found through people's searches when they're doing research for stories, and roundups and things that they're creating for their publications. So in terms of like how often, I think, it varies. You could go with that once a quarter sort of place when you're starting. Or you could say, I don't really see myself putting together a campaign and doing all the administrative work around that. Instead, I'm going to make sure that all of my activities have some way of pushing my discoverability and visibility forward, because that's going to lead to more inbound interest in you, with the media, and then also with, lots of other populations and audiences.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Does anybody else have any any of you thinking about trying to go and pursue more PR coverage in the last quarter of the year or first quarter next year? If you have any questions related to that, I mean, I'd love to try to give you some direction.
Do you think that there's something inherently more marketable about partnerships? Like, is that an angle in and of itself? Because like I could imagine your co-work space partnering with local artists, or having, fundraising little art shows, or, that kind of thing, to sort of become a social, sort of an event-based PR type thing. And I mean, I'm assuming you've done that with your foraging stuff, right, Carla? And did you see measurable changes in your traffic and your deliverable?
We didn't specifically do art. We did do a market where we invited a bunch of people from the community to come out, just have a nice day. It was basically like whatever we got in table fees went back into marketing. We got really good traction, really good coverage. A lot of people who aren't usually our clients, but they were like, hey, I've never in this perf town. It's good to know that this is here. We collaborated with 10 Bits. 10-Bit Works. It's a local makerspace, so they had a few artists come out. It was nice. It was very nice to collaborate with people and actually collaborate. No one was at cross purposes. It was really nice. I like working with people. We did get a little bit of coverage from the San Antonio Herald on their website for it. So
one thing to throw out to you for events is that you can get did you get coverage of the event itself? Like, it came out after the event? They came and they wrote about the fact that it had happened?
Yes, and they also ran ads about the events prior to it.
All right. Yeah. So a lot of publications, and it just depends on the specific media outlet, but a lot of them have a totally separate way that they bring in information for their calendar and events than they do for the coverage that they feature. So it's good to know which place to send the information before the event, and then who you need to talk to if you want someone to actually come out and cover it, because they can be different. And different types of media have different like habits around that. Like there's a lot of local television stations that love to go cover community-based events for certain segments of TV shows. And you have to kind of know what's happening in your area and figure out who the right person to talk to is. But generally, those types of media outlets are really like they want to find great stories, right? Because otherwise their audience is not going to be paying attention to them anymore. And so they think they have an incentive. It's just a matter of trying to get in front of them in a genuine way. It's oftentimes, it goes back to that time-consuming piece and that mindset piece, because it can be hard to, call up some TV station and who do I talk to about this thing that we're doing,
One piece of advice, that's how I actually ended up with most of my coverage. If you see a networking event that's being hosted by one of the news organizations, it's a really good idea to go, because it's a lot easier to email someone who gave you their card than it is to cold email a random address you found on the internet.
Yes, that's a great piece of advice.
Still no guarantee they're gonna answer, but it feels better.
Yeah, and if people don't answer, I mean, I think this is universal with press. Their culture, I mean, it's culturally okay not to reply to people in the media. I have told the story many, many times about my editor that, she's an amazing person. We were legitimately friends, but if I emailed her, sometimes I wouldn't hear back for 2 weeks, and they just don't get back to you unless they're going to cover you. But that doesn't mean they are not interested. So I think continuing to follow up and just being persistent and knowing that you have something of value to provide and that you're targeting the right person, it's a complete misfire if, when people pitch me about car news or something, it's they didn't do their homework at all. As long as you're paying attention to what the person you're reaching out to is actually writing about or creating content around, I think that you need to just keep in mind that it's not about them writing you back every time. It's about the activity of having this as a regular, consistent piece of your business operations, and that when you do that, you will get media coverage over the long term.
And as far as end of the year stuff, I know we have we have an event coming up that I know we have to get media out for. So yeah, that's going to be fun. And I'm not 100% sure how we're going to do this, because I think we've done really good in the past as far as just putting it on event calendars, on different platforms and just promoting it on social media. But I think out of maybe the 5 news outlet areas that we go, there's only one that has ever covered our good market, and they cover it consistently, but they're pretty much going away now. So I'm okay, we're not really sure how to do this right now.
Yeah. Well, I do encourage you to continue to reach out to the traditional media. But at the same time, I think sometimes it can be helpful to, expand your definition of press and media, right? So one thing I see happening and being very effective, and perhaps more effective than some traditional media coverage, is coverage by other businesses, and they're willing to put you on their site and put you in front of their audience. A lot of that cross promotion activity, if you can figure out ways to get them invested in the event itself, And it's a market, right? Yeah, I mean, if you could, I would think around like, how can I facilitate other people sharing this and posting it on their websites and on their social media, because they're going to be able to put you in front of an audience that is probably going to be the best fit for you. And traditional media is great because it has a lot of social proof and it brings a lot of credibility to you as an organization. But it might not be as effective in bringing in the ideal people to come to the market and spend money and support the businesses. I don't know. But I think sometimes if you can get those other business owners on board, almost every brand today is like under the, it's like you have the challenge of being a mini publishing house. And so I think sometimes thinking about those other entities as forms of media is really important. They can get you to the right people almost better than a mainstream news outlet. That said, I would still put together like your short, sweet, brief, pitch email and like a backgrounder about the event or whatever marketing materials you have, and make sure that it goes out to those people. Make sure you follow up at least twice, and let them know at least like 5 weeks beforehand if you can. So, a lot of times the timing is a major factor in all of this as well. People just,
Yeah.
Well, what I would say, I mean, for all of you, if you're ever thinking about PR and getting visible, we've talked a little bit about it here. There's a lot of information that is on the podcast itself, which you can find at spiritofsix08.com. That's also the Instagram. And so if you're looking for, visibility tips, content creation tips, PR, marketing help, we have a lot of episodes that focus on that, and a lot that dive into the paths that female founders have taken along their road to creating a business in the space. And I have a full hour-and-a-half DIY PR training that's available from the Spirit of 608 website. So if you go to the site, there's a thing at the top, like a link that you can click in it to take the masterclass. So it'll give you, a really in-depth video training that you can take. Like you can watch 5 minutes of it, stop it, come back later, and it will, help you put some real action steps on PR and visibility based on what you are trying to achieve and where you are with your business. So I encourage you to come check that out. As part of that, we also offer people a discount on the Presto course program. So if you are thinking about doubling down on PR as a way to get visible and grow, definitely go in through that link, because it will be a way to access the program that we don't offer anywhere else. So that's always there for you. And I just am glad that I finally got to come talk to the Ethical Network folks. And, I'd encourage you to stay in touch, and you can find me on Instagram, and you can always email me, Lorraine at Spirit of 608, if you'd like to reach out.